Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to LiveCorp for the opportunity to speak here on behalf of the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association and our members. The NTCA is an association that promises to advance and protect the interests of cattle producers in the NT. I'm proud to be the 14th President of the NTCA and pleased to be asked to come and address your forum today. Today I've been asked to provide a pastoralist's perspective on the live export industry, remembering that the pastoral sector spreads far beyond the borders of the Northern Territory across much of Northern and Central Australia. As I have spent much of my life here in the NT, I feel somewhat qualified to comment. Accordingly, I hope you will forgive me if my meanderings and ruminations here this afternoon become a little NT-centric. The live export industry is essential to all of our daily lives in Northern Australia. Here in the NT, live export is like a giant octopus with its tentacles entwined in so many of our daily businesses, not just pastoral, but nearly all of the businesses in the NT profit or service the supply chain of the live export industry. The pastoral industry is 150 years old this year. At the NTCA conference in March, I had the honour of being able to announce this milestone. A milestone for any industry of the world, but one of particular significance in Australia, given that it predates federation. As part of the celebrations, I had the honour of travelling out to Undulia Station at Alice Springs, the home of 5 generations of the Hayes family, to unveil a plaque to commemorate Pastoral Lease 1 and Pastoral Lease 2 in the Northern Territory 150 years ago this year. In that time, pastoralists have seen every manner of government action and inaction, programs, reviews, legislation and regulation. There have been hundreds of politicians and thousands of public servants, some good, some not so good. In today's political environment, the world moves quickly and the agricultural sector is increasingly facing new and unique challenges. There can be no doubt that we had some trepidations and concerns around this year's federal election. In fact, far more than we had in the past few years. We were one of the only agricultural groups to publicly state our concerns about the potential election of a Labor federal government. Why? Why would a fiercely apolitical association such as ours risk the ire of the new government? Well, because of their stated policy and track record on live exports. I will use today's platform to speak clearly of our policy and opinions. I have never been accused of not speaking my mind somewhat directly. So let me be clear. The policy federal Labor has regarding the export of sheep from Western Australia is wrong. And in our opinion, will end up doing more harm than good. Whilst there are few sheep in the Northern Territory, and this is a trade we are not financially invested in, we support producers being able to access this market, especially in times of drought and financial difficulty. I ask the government why. Based on what evidence? Why make the same mistake twice? This is an industry that has done much good for Australia and much good for the people of the Middle East. It has put food on the tables of those who would have otherwise gone without. To remove it due to pressure from mostly uninformed animal welfare groups will be a regression and should never be seen as progress. We have said this before. We felt it especially important to say it during the election. We felt it a matter of principle to state it publicly and clearly. We are not the kind of organisation or people to simply smile and nod and then act behind your back. We spoke up because it was important, and we will continue to do so directly and truthfully throughout any future debate on this subject. While we remain concerned about some of this government's policies, on several other fronts, some of our fears have proven to be unfounded. Minister Watt has proven to be a welcome change to the agricultural portfolio, and we have been more than satisfied by his management of biosecurity threats to Australian cattle, both at home and in Indonesia. I personally have found Minister Watt to be communicative and collaborative and responsive to our concerns about our industry. He, like us, has a direct, respectful and honest approach to the business. As always, ours is a business of relationships. We don't care which side of politics you sit on. We judge not by party but by people. I am proud to say that here in the Northern Territory, Minister Kirby can be counted as a friend of the industry. The contribution he made and that of his department this year to the protection of all of our businesses through investment in biosecurity has been significant and most welcome. Thank you, Minister Kirby. The work conducted by government and industry this year in strengthening our biosecurity system proves that through collaboration we can implement good policy. Through trust and respectful relationships, industry and government can do much together. Just like the National Farmers Federation, the NTCA calls for biosecurity of our nation's agriculture to be sustainably funded, forward-looking and not subject to political party whims. Minister Watt has in fact this week called for a national discussion of this point. In fact, some years ago, former President of the NTCA, Chris Knott, called for a container tax to fund biosecurity to be implemented in order to fund these protections. We remain committed to this policy in one form or another. It stands to reason that all Australians must be invested in the protection of the nation's agricultural industries in perpetuity. This is the price that all of us must pay to secure our families' food, future and livelihoods. While most Australians have never experienced food scarcity, or if they have, it has been brief, the biggest threats to this security is a massive biosecurity incursion. Food security may be taken as a given in Australia, but only through improving the protections that allow for it can we safeguard it into the future. As we go about securing this future, the world around us is changing, not always for the better, in my opinion. Negative social media and social activism are a clear and present threat to our business and our way of life. This type of activism that really gets on my goat is called virtue signalling. Well, that's what I call it. Virtue signalling is the action or practice of publicly expressing opinions or sentiments intended to demonstrate one's good character or the moral correctness of one's position on a particular issue. But often the problem with this virtue signalling is the hypocrisy that you open yourself up to. Like Pat Cummins, the Australian Test cricket captain, having a whinge about being sponsored by Alinta Energy and jet-setting around the world in gas-guzzling aeroplanes. Playing cricket under energy-sapping lights after driving to the game in his sponsored gas-guzzling V8 Range Rover. Hypocrisy knows no limits. Banks, insurance companies and other multinational organisations, many of whom do business with producers across the north, have also started this trend of virtue signalling. A number of these businesses are now stating that they will not do business, or finance companies involved in the live export trade, but are happy to do business with pastoralists and cattlemen that may sell stock to the trade. The Animals Australia aligned Bank Australia promotes that they do not lend to live exporters, even though not one exporter has ever asked them to do business with them. They make these claims for commercial gain, to fool people into banking with them, thinking they are choosing a better option. However, activist-aligned organisations are not alone in this. Some of the mainstream banks have moved into this space as well. That's right, banks that, following the Royal Commission into Banking, were forced to pay a $25 million fine and return more than $682 million to customers in fees and charges improperly collected over more than a decade, has this year reaffirmed the importance of their customers in the production sector reporting animal welfare grievances or claims made against them, regardless of their legitimacy. You see what I mean by virtue signalling? Declaring themselves holier than thou by decrying live export whilst they rip off their customers. There is nothing in this world more dangerous than a person who, as they decry the efforts of others, get rich believing themselves to be virtuous and above those upon whose shoulders they stand. As we in the Territory already know, poorly implemented government policy, even with the best of intentions, can be brutal and leave scars on industries, the people who work in them, and can ultimately change our way of life, leaving livelihoods shattered and irrevocably changed in their wake. While money will never serve as true compensation for past acts such as in 2011, it is the only solution that industry was able to turn to. Yet more than 2 years after the judgment in the live cattle class action, hundreds of claimants remain uncompensated for what was poorly instituted government interference, showing blatant disregard to the effects on people, their animals, their livelihood and their industry. Who here today does not know what I mean? What members of this industry in the room can say they do not bear the marks of their constant fights with government bureaucracy? Those among the live export industry bear more of these scars than others. From a producer point of view, this live export cost recovery program is not the answer, as ultimately we, the producer, will bear the expense. Some of the systems governing live export are overbearing, expensive, cumbersome, and ultimately ineffective. To add to this continued desire to recover the costs of too many public servants doing far too little or far too much get in the way of your industry functioning efficiently is not the answer either. While it may appear a simple thing that exporters should pay for the costs of regulation themselves, the reality is they will never be alone in paying for this. Indonesian companies and cattle producers here in Australia will bear the brunt of this as well. Producers already pay income tax, capital gains tax, goods and services tax, local government tax, petroleum and diesel tax, alcohol tax. We've got more taxes than income streams. And now I will have to factor in a live export tax into my business, because that is what full cost recovery will be. A tax on live exporters, simply for being live exporters. A tax on producers for selling to them, and a tax on Indonesian customers for no other reason than they have the misfortune to be sitting on the wrong end of the supply chain to the Australian government. It is fundamentally wrong to tax the customer in a supply chain for no other reason than being the customer. During a time of global financial instability, rapid inflation and food insecurity, surely no government will continue with this madness. We must go back to what is practical, what makes sense, what is fair and reasonable. So often it's the simplest approach that is the most effective. We know this because our industry is 150 years old this year. Whilst there has been enormous changes across the generations in 150 years, the constants have remained the same. Never take your eye off the fundamentals. Look after your land, your livestock, and your loved ones. I think it would be fair to say that in the past, producers and live exporters across the north have not always had a harmonious relationship. So I consider it somewhat of a privilege to be invited here to address the event. Due to the somewhat gladiatorial relationship in the past of producers and exporters, buyers and sellers in the industry, the relationship between the NTCA and the NTLEA became somewhat fractious. However, this is not the case today. The NTCA now has a past NTLEA CEO at the helm. The current chairman of the NTLEA is a past president of the NTCA. The current president of the NTCA was a former livestock agent that spent a good deal of time in the world of live export markets. So both sides of this industry have a very good understanding of the other and of each other. I think it is not only important but imperative that both sides of this industry come together and work to solve each other's issues within this supply chain. In saying this, it is my opinion that it is not the job of the NTCA to stick its finger in the NTLEA pie. It is the NTLEA's job to look after the in-market aspects of the industry supply chain and its customers. It is the producer's clear job to provide the produce that the market, its agents and its customers desire. And whilst it is good business to know one's customers, this is an area that NTLEA should clearly lead. But this does not mean that we will ignore our markets or the wishes of our customers. In fact, the NTCA has gone further than most in trying to provide a production sector perspective and share our skills and knowledge to those ultimately looking after our cattle and buying our beef. To achieve this, NTCA has introduced and run the NIAP program with Indonesian students since 2012. NIAP is the NTCA Indonesian Australia Pastoral Program. This program introduces Indonesian students to the NT pastoralists' way of life. Young Indonesian students are placed on NT cattle stations. They work with the ringers as part of the stock camp. They sleep in swags, learn to ride horses, motorbikes, muster cattle, work cattle, brand, vaccinate, check waters, fence, and 1,000 other things that happen in a stock camp. Yes, the mind boggles. The program was targeted at future leaders of the Indonesian cattle industry with the hope of having these Australian-trained kids infiltrate the system and take their advanced learning back to their country. And this is exactly what it has achieved, with many of the alumni now in senior positions across university, government and the feedlot industry and performing well in the Indonesian cattle industry. Many also now work in the in-market exporters supply chain and have been a fantastic resource for the industry between the two countries. It is really a fantastic program, highly valued by those that have been associated with it. So, whilst it has not always been the case, the two sectors of the one industry are now more united than they have ever been. Pastoralists and their industry association, the NTCA, are now more than ever engaging with the NTLEA and you lying, cheating, thieving cattle buyers. Finally, let me say this to you from the pastoral industry. Congratulations to you of the live export industry, the agents, the exporters, supply chain stakeholders and your customers. Somehow, the live export of cattle from Northern Australia has withstood a global pandemic, an outbreak of FMD and LSD in Indonesia, record high cattle prices and rising input prices and a difficult global financial market. Somehow, our little industry that means so much to so many has been able to persevere and thrive. But remember, the sustainability of this great industry will only continue if each brick in the building is placed correctly. If producers only offer cattle that will make the health specification, and if a mistake is made, to rectify the situation promptly. For the exporters to understand their immense responsibility and only accept the specification required. The industry is only sustainable while each and every one of us does our job faithfully, accurately and correctly. We as producers must not accept second rate, nor should you, of us. One of the founding philosophies of the NTCA, a pillar by which we still stand today, is that the problems of one can often be addressed most effectively when shared with the many. Together, we are best placed to assist those who have fallen behind and need help catching back up with the pack. Together, we can hold the ground against greater challenges than that which we would by ourselves be able to withstand. These are tough times with serious challenges. It is time for honest people with a strength of character that is not as common today as it once was to stand up for the industry and protect what is not only just but right. I am pleased to say that we here today are friends, so let me offer you some advice that only a friend can provide. Never get so used to being beaten up that you start believing that it's okay to let people hit you. When you're in a fight, you can't win alone. Look to your friends for support, because after all, we're actually working in the same set of cattle yards.